Two Bonds, two films, both released in 1983 by rival companies.
It's a rival 007 played by Sean Connery.
First I'd heard about that. That's amazing.
But this was not a simple box office competition. It was an explosive moment in a struggle for the franchise rights that had been simmering for over 2 decades. Get ready to dive into the complex origins of this legal battle, the production of both films, and how this 50-year feud ultimately came to an end. We'll start by looking at its origins in 1958, when author Ian Fleming was growing burned out on Bond. After releasing 6 novels, Fleming began looking for a way to bring 007 to the big screen. His friend Ivar Bryce joined forces with ambitious Irish filmmaker Kevin McClory through Xanadu Productions, and McClory soon became central to the feature film plans. McClory apparently saw enormous potential in taking the character of James Bond to the big screen. His vision was for a larger-than-life cinematic hero. To achieve this, McClory brought in professional screenwriter Jack Whittingham to help structure the story and pen the scripts. Together, Fleming, McClory, and Whittingham collaborated on several drafts for a story, at one point titled Longitude 78 West. It was here, in developing a story specifically for the screen, the key elements that would define the Aeon film series were claimed to be invented: the globe-spanning terrorist organization Spectre and its enigmatic, cat-stroking leader, Ernst Stavro Blofeld. These concepts, created for the film project, were not yet part of Fleming's literary world. This distinction is critical, because McClory's eventual legal claims weren't just claiming rights to a single plot, but to the very villains who would become the franchise's primary antagonists. This collaborative film project ultimately unraveled by 1960. But in 1961, Fleming, seemingly without the permission of his collaborators, took the discarded screenplay and used it as the basis for his 9th novel, Thunderball. When the novel was published, he failed to credit his collaborators. Upon reading an advance copy of the book, McClory was enraged and immediately began legal proceedings for breach of copyright and plagiarism. The ensuing Thunderball case went to the High Court in London in late November 1963. In December 1963, the case was settled. The court order was a stunning victory for McClory. Fleming was ordered to assign and sell the film copyright of the novel Thunderball, as well as copyrights in the original screenplays, directly to Kevin McClory. This settlement armed McClory with the one thing Aeon Productions producers Albert Broccoli and Harry Saltzman would come to fear most: the legal right for McClory to make his own James Bond films. By 1964, Broccoli and Saltzman's Aeon Productions had ignited a global phenomenon with Dr. No and Goldfinger. They intended to adapt Thunderball next, but Fleming's legal defeat blocked them. They were forced to negotiate with Kevin McClory for the story rights. As a result, an uneasy truce was formed. Aeon licensed McClory's rights for a single film, but McClory's terms were steep. For the 1965 film adaptation of Thunderball, McClory received a sole producer credit, a co-production deal, and even a brief cameo in the film, smoking a cigar in the Nassau casino. Most importantly, McClory insisted this was only a temporary arrangement. McClory demanded that all rights revert back to his company after 10 years, with the specific, stated intention that he could one day make further James Bond films. That 10-year license expired in 1975. This legal deadline dictated the trajectory of the official Bond series. Aeon's use of Spectre and Blofeld abruptly stopped after 1971's Diamonds Are Forever. This was not by choice. When Aeon attempted to reintroduce Blofeld in the 1977 film The Spy Who Loved Me, McClory started the process for an injunction. This injunction pushed Aeon to remove Blofeld and Spectre from the film and create legally distinct stand-in villains to fill the void. This legal limitation would persist for decades, eventually forcing the 21st century Daniel Craig-era films to invent the Quantum Organization as a substitute for Spectre. As soon as the rights reverted in 1975, McClory began his quest to remake Thunderball, announcing a new Bond film, James Bond of the Secret Service, which later evolved into a project titled Warhead. McClory had a secret weapon: Sean Connery. Connery had walked away from the Aeon franchise in 1971, famously stating he would never play Bond again. His return was seemingly motivated by several factors. Connery's exit from Aeon was deeply bitter. He felt he had been bilked out of money and treated as a subordinate, not a partner, so this new film gave an opportunity for vindication. He had also grown wary of the official series' increasing focus on spectacle and gadgets. McClory offered Connery a partnership, script approval, and the chance to make a more substantial film. And Connery was offered a reported $3 to $5 million payday, plus casting and script approval, and a share of the profits, a far superior deal to any Aeon had offered him. The project finally came together. Producer Jack Schwartzman joined McClory, bringing in the legal and financial backing of Warner Brothers. Their lawyers successfully fought off a final 1983 injunction from the Fleming trustees, at last clearing the path for production. They assembled an elite team, hiring Irving Kershner, celebrated director of The Empire Strikes Back, and a crew that included several veterans of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Sean Connery agreed to join the rival Never Say Never Again project to gain the creative control, partnership, and professional respect that Aeon had denied him. But he found the exact opposite. The production was plagued by chaos. Connery reportedly described the shoot as a Mickey Mouse operation. Producer Jack Schwartzman ran into several budget problems, forcing him to pare down action sequences and reportedly using his own money to complete the film. Tensions between Connery and Schwartzman escalated to the point where they barely spoke. Far from being the respected partner he had envisioned, Connery was forced to become the de facto on-set producer, managing the production to prevent its collapse while Schwartzman stayed away. Now, this was precisely the kind of on-set burden he had sought to escape. The experience was so off-putting that it reportedly drove Connery into a 3-year break from acting. The production was also physically hazardous. During pre-production, the film's martial arts instructor, a young Steven Seagal, accidentally broke Sean Connery's wrist during a training session.
And then I got a little cocky because I thought I knew what I was doing. Then I got a bit flash and I did that and he broke my wrist.
Is it still broken?
Yeah, that's 15 years ago.
While McClory's Mickey Mouse operation was struggling, Aeon Productions was facing its own crisis. The studio was fighting a war on two fronts. First, their incumbent star, Roger Moore, was 55, operating on a picture-by-picture deal, and had openly expressed a desire to quit the series. With Moore seemingly on his way out, Broccoli began a serious search for the next official James Bond. The frontrunner and the man who came very close to securing the role was American actor James Brolin. But Brolin was not merely considered, he was pretty much cast. Broccoli flew him to London for 3 days of extensive tests, which included choreographed fight scenes and love scenes with Maud Adams, who was eventually cast in Octopussy. But the existence of Never Say Never Again is why Roger Moore ended up starring in Octopussy. Without Connery's rival film, James Brolin would have been the next James Bond. But when Broccoli received word of how advanced the Never Say Never Again production was, and that his nemesis Sean Connery was confirmed to star, he feared a box office disaster, making the harsh decision that this was no time to introduce a new 007 to the world. Broccoli immediately began to woo Roger Moore back. Moore agreed to return, and the unfortunate phone call was made to Brolin to inform him he was out. In stark contrast to the chaos of Never Say Never Again, the $27.5 million production of Octopussy was a well-oiled machine. Aeon veteran John Glenn returned to direct. The screenplay, written by George MacDonald Fraser, Richard Maibaum, and Michael G. Wilson, was a mostly original story. For the title role, Aeon broke its own long-standing rule against reusing lead actresses. Maud Adams, who had previously played Andrea Anders in 1974's The Man with the Golden Gun, was cast as Octopussy. Octopussy, distributed by MGM United Artists, was released first on June 6, 1983. Never Say Never Again, distributed by Warner Brothers, followed in the fall on October 7th. Aeon's marketing strategy for Octopussy was defensive. It emphasized its legitimacy and ownership of the true Ian Fleming Bond formula, with posters proclaiming Roger Moore as James Bond. The Never Say Never Again campaign, by contrast, built on the novelty of Connery's return. Critically, the battle was largely a draw, with both films receiving mixed reviews. But when the dust settled, the box office numbers told a fascinating story. Never Say Never Again scored a bigger opening weekend with close to $11 million. But Octopussy had stronger legs and a much healthier profit margin, making it the box office victor. The 1983 Battle of the Bonds was the peak of the war, but it was not the end. Kevin McClory, emboldened by Never Say Never Again's success, was not finished. He spent the 1990s attempting to launch yet another Thunderball remake, this time titled Warhead 2000 AD. He then filed a sweeping lawsuit claiming that he, not Ian Fleming, had created the cinematic James Bond, and therefore demanded a share of the entire franchise's $3 billion in profits. This final desperate gambit failed. In 2001, a U.S. Court of Appeals upheld a ruling that McClory had waited too long to file his claims, effectively and permanently ending his legal ability to produce more rival films. Kevin McClory died in 2006. The final chapter of the Thunderball saga was written on November 15, 2013. Aeon MGM had acquired all of the remaining rights and interests related to James Bond from McClory's estate. This settlement specifically and finally returned the full, uncontested rights to the Thunderball story, the villain Ernst Stavro Blofeld, and the organization Spectre to Aeon Productions. This 2013 legal victory had an immediate and profound cinematic consequence. Aeon Productions, now in the midst of the Daniel Craig era, was finally free to use the villains it had been forced to abandon decades earlier. The studio's 2015 film, the 24th in the official series, served as a definitive victory lap. Its title? Spectre. After half a century of legal battles, substitute villains, and the unprecedented Battle of the Bonds in 1983, Aeon Productions could finally and legally bring its greatest antagonists home.